I was the lawyer for a divorce where the brother slept with the wife. My client didn't just leave, he legally gifted them a $1 million debt-ridden mansion, emptied every account, and vanished while they were served an eviction notice on the baby's due date. I've handled 340 divorces in 14 years. I've seen men cry in my office. I've seen women burn credit cards in the parking lot. I've seen a husband show up to a deposition with his new girlfriend sitting in the lobby while his wife signed papers 20 feet away. I have never, not once in 340 cases, seen what Declan Marsh did. And I've been doing this long enough to know that most people who say they're going to make their cheating spouse pay end up settling for 50% and crying into a glass of wine. Declan didn't settle. Declan didn't cry. Declan walked into my office on a Thursday afternoon in February, sat down across from my desk, and said, "Counselor, I don't want revenge. I want architecture." I said, "Excuse me." He said, "I want to build something. The kind of exit that can't be undone. The kind that holds weight for years after I'm gone. Can you help me with that or not?" I said yes. I should have known then that this case was going to be different. My name is Petra Voss. I'm 41. Divorce attorney. 14 years of family law in a mid-sized city where everybody eventually knows somebody you've represented. I'm not a shark. I'm a carpenter. I build solid cases. I follow the rules. I win through precision, not intimidation. Declan Marsh was 39 when he came to me. Software architect. Built systems that managed data for 3 mid-sized hospital networks. Not flashy money. Quiet money. The kind that accumulates in index funds and real estate and a savings account that most people would be embarrassed to admit they had at 39. He was organized. Calm. The kind of man who brought a folder to our first meeting with every financial document tabbed and dated. His wife was Renata Marsh. 37. Event planner. Good at her job. Better at keeping secrets. They'd been married 9 years. No children together. Though that was about to change. For one of them. His brother was Corbett Marsh. 35. Freelance photographer. The kind of freelance that mostly meant he went to parties and called it work. He'd borrowed $14,000 from Declan over 4 years. Never paid back a dollar. Declan told me this without bitterness. Like he was reading a utility bill. Here's what happened. Declan found out 6 weeks before he came to me. He didn't find out through a text. He didn't catch them in bed. He found out through a pregnancy test. He found it under the bathroom sink. Positive. Renata wasn't on birth control. They hadn't been intimate in 4 months. The math didn't work. He confronted her that night. She cried for 11 minutes. Then she stopped crying and said the sentence that apparently ended his marriage in real time. She said, "Corbett and I have been seeing each other for 14 months. I'm keeping the baby. And I think you should know that we're in love." Declan told me he sat in silence for 3 minutes after that. Then he stood up. He said, "Okay." Then he went to the guest room and slept 8 hours without interruption. He told me this detail specifically. He said, "I want you to understand what kind of man you're dealing with. I don't react. I plan." I believed him. The next 6 weeks before he came to me, he was building. Not reacting. Building. He went through 9 years of joint finances with the precision of an auditor who already knows where the fraud is and just needs to document the path. What he found was not what he expected. The house. 4 bedrooms. 2,800 square feet. Originally purchased for $640,000 in 2018. Declan's down payment, $128,000. His money. Saved before the marriage. His parents had given him $40,000 of that as a wedding gift. The house was now assessed at $1,020,000. Which sounds like a win. Except. In 2021 Renata had refinanced the house without telling Declan. He'd been traveling for a 4-month work contract. She'd had him sign a stack of documents he trusted her to handle. One of those documents was a refinancing agreement that pulled $310,000 in equity out of the property. She said it was for home improvements. There were no home improvements. The $310,000 went into a joint account and then disappeared in 18 months into what Declan discovered was a pattern of cash withdrawals, event planning invoices that didn't match any verifiable events, and transfers to an account he'd never seen before. He tracked the account. It was in Corbett's name. She had been funding Corbett's lifestyle for 18 months. Corbett the freelance photographer who went to parties. Corbett the brother who owed Declan $14,000. Corbett, it turned out, had been funding his parties and his travel and his camera equipment and 2 months in Portugal with his wife's refinanced equity. $310,000. Declan's equity. Renata's theft. Corbett's lifestyle. When Declan sat down across from me and laid this out, I took notes without reacting. I've heard worse. But the property situation was what made this case unusual. Because of the refinancing, the house that was worth $1,020,000 had a mortgage balance of $618,000. Plus the original remaining mortgage of $267,000. Total debt against the property, $885,000. Assessed value, $1,020,000. Total debt, $885,000. Equity remaining, $135,000. That $135,000 represented everything Declan had built in 9 years of marriage in terms of property equity. After the refinancing theft, after 9 years of mortgage payments, after the $128,000 down payment, $135,000 was what was left. I said, Declan. In a standard divorce, the house would go to auction or one party buys the other out. You'd walk away with roughly $67,500. Half the equity. He said, I know. I said, given the refinancing, you may have grounds for a fraud claim that could recapture some of the $310,000. But that's a separate civil case. Potentially long. Potentially expensive. He said, I know that too. I said, what do you want to do with the house? He said, I want to give it to them. I said, I'm sorry. He said, I want to gift the house to Renata and Corbett. Sign it over. Let them have it. I put my pen down. I said, Declan. The house has $885,000 in debt against a $1,020,000 value. The equity is $135,000. If you gift it to them, you walk away with nothing from the property. They get a house worth $135,000 in actual value. That's not a gift. That's a trap. He looked at me. He said, that's the architecture. I started to understand. He said, Renata wants the house. She's told her friends she's keeping the house. Corbett has been telling people he's moving in with her. They want the house. So I'm going to give it to them. All of it. The mortgage. The refinancing debt. The property tax arrears. Yes, there are property tax arrears. She missed 2 payments during the Portugal months. The lien from the HVAC contractor who replaced the system last fall and hasn't been paid. The second lien from the landscaping company. All of it. Gifted. With love. I said, the HVAC lien. How much? He said, $14,200. I said, the landscaping lien. He said, $8,700. I said, so total encumbrances on the property. He said, $908,000. Against a $1,020,000 value. They'll own a house with $112,000 in actual equity. And a combined $3,200 monthly payment. Plus property taxes. Plus the HVAC and landscaping liens they'll need to resolve or they'll lose the house anyway. I said, and you're walking away from $135,000 in equity to do this. He said, I'm walking away from $135,000 to give them a $1,020,000 problem they think is a prize. I said nothing for 11 seconds. I counted. Then I said, tell me about the accounts. The accounts. Declan had 4 accounts. 1 joint checking. 1 joint savings. 1 personal checking he'd maintained since before the marriage. 1 brokerage account also from before the marriage. The joint checking, $14,300 at the time of separation. Community property. Split 50-50 in a standard divorce. He'd get $7,150. The joint savings, $47,800. Also community property. He'd get $23,900. His personal checking, $38,200. Legally his. Premarital. Non-community. His brokerage account, $284,000. Premarital. Non-community. 14 years of investing before, during, and after the marriage in an account that had never been touched by joint funds. Total Declan's personal assets, $322,200. Protected. Total he'd get from community property and standard divorce, approximately $31,050 after splitting joints. He said, I've been moving money for 6 weeks. I said, what does that mean? He said, my personal accounts were always clean. Non-marital. But the joint accounts, in the 6 weeks since I found out, the joint accounts have been drawn down. I said, drawn down how? He said, Renata has been using the joint checking for expenses. Normal use. But the joint savings, I transferred it. The full $47,800. Into a separate personal account she doesn't know about. I did it in 4 transfers over 6 weeks so it wouldn't trigger a single large transaction flag. $12,000. $11,400. $13,200. $11,200. I set my pen down again. I said, Declan. In a divorce proceeding, concealing marital assets is. He said, I know what it is. Let me finish. I waited. He said, I transferred the joint savings into a new personal account. I then made a series of payments from that account. Legitimate payments. Business expenses, documented. Personal debts, documented. A charitable contribution of $22,000 to a children's hospital foundation in my parents' names. And a payment of the remaining $25,800 to an escrow account that represents a security deposit and first 6 months' rent on an apartment I've already signed a lease for. In another city. I said, you're leaving. He said, I've left. On paper. I just haven't physically moved yet. The lease starts in 19 days. The city is 340 miles from here. The job transition has been in process for 4 months. I accepted the offer before I found the pregnancy test. I was going to tell Renata and make it a conversation. Then I found the test and decided the conversation wasn't necessary. I said, the apartment lease. That's a legitimate expense. He said, first 6 months prepaid. Non-refundable. Documented. And the charitable contribution is fully documented. Receipt from the foundation. Everything clean. Everything legal. Everything explainable. I said, what about the joint checking? He said, that's for you. File the divorce today. Freeze the joint checking through the court. She gets $7,150. Which is her half. I've already removed my direct deposit. She doesn't know yet. She'll find out when her debit card doesn't work for an amount over $7,150. I want you to understand what I was looking at across my desk. A man who had been systematically preparing his legal exit for 6 weeks while sleeping in the same house as his wife and brother's affair. Going to work. Coming home. Saying nothing. Building architecture. I filed the divorce petition that afternoon. Emergency asset freeze on the joint checking. Standard procedure when concealment is suspected. Protects both parties' interests during the proceeding. Renata was served 3 days later. She called Declan 9 times in the first hour. He didn't answer. She showed up at his office. He was in a meeting. His assistant said he was unavailable. She left. He told me she left a handwritten note with his assistant that said, Declan, we need to talk. Please. I know you're hurt. But there's a baby coming. Our family needs you. Our family. The family that had been sleeping with his brother for 14 months. He sent the note to me. I filed it. Renata hired an attorney named Godfrey Sims. Sims called me 2 days after being retained. Sims said, my client wants the house. She's willing to negotiate on financial accounts, but the house is non-negotiable. She's pregnant and needs stable housing. I said, my client is prepared to gift the property to your client. Full deed transfer. No buyout required. Sims went quiet. Then he said, full transfer. No payment. I said, my client wants nothing from the property. He's prepared to sign a quitclaim deed transferring his full interest to your client effective upon finalization of the divorce. Sims said, that's generous. I said, my client is a generous man. There was a pause. Then Sims said, what's the current mortgage situation? I said, there's an existing mortgage with a balance of $267,000 and a refinancing instrument with a balance of $618,000. Total secured debt against the property is $885,000. Additionally, there are 2 contractor liens totaling $22,900 and property tax arrears of $4,800. Your client would assume all associated encumbrances as part of the transfer. Sims said, total debt. $912,700. Against an assessed value of. I said, $1,020,000. Sims was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I need to consult with my client. He called back 4 hours later. He said, my client accepts the property transfer. She understands she'll be assuming the associated debt. She and Mr. Corbett Marsh intend to refinance once they're established in the property. I said, of course. What Renata and Godfrey Sims apparently didn't fully process, or didn't consult a financial advisor about, was that refinancing $912,700 in total debt against a $1,020,000 property requires exceptional credit and a combined income that would support the payments. Corbett's freelance photography income in his best year was $31,000. Renata's event planning business showed $68,000 in revenue, but the divorce proceedings revealed that $29,000 of that revenue had been reinvested into Corbett's lifestyle through the now documented fund transfers. Her actual take-home was closer to $39,000. His was $31,000. Combined, $70,000 a year. Gross. The house payments alone, combined mortgage, refinancing instrument, estimated taxes and insurance, would run approximately $5,800 a month. $69,600 a year. Just for the house. On a $70,000 combined gross income. Before food. Before utilities. Before diapers. The architecture was holding perfectly. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. Declan signed the quitclaim deed in my office at 2 p.m. He was wearing a gray blazer I'd never seen before. He had a bag packed and a car service booked for 4 p.m. The apartment 340 miles away was ready. His new job started Monday. I handed him the finalized documents. I said, it's done. He said, what happens next with the house? I said, the deed transfer process is in 7 to 10 business days. Once it's recorded, it's theirs. All of it. The equity and the debt. He said, and the eviction notice. I said, the property tax arrears triggered an automatic lien escalation. County has already filed. They'll receive the escalation notice approximately 10 days after the deed transfer records. He said, so they'll get the house on paper, celebrate, start moving Corbett's photography equipment in, and then receive a county escalation notice telling them they're delinquent on property taxes and that if the arrears aren't resolved within 30 days they'll face accelerated foreclosure proceedings. I said, that is an accurate summary of the likely timeline. He said, when does Renata's due date fall in that timeline? I said, her due date is March 14th. The deed transfer will record approximately March 10th. The county notice will arrive approximately March 20th. 6 days after the baby is born. Declan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, 6 days. I said, 6 days. He stood up. Shook my hand. Firm. Steady. Like a man who'd just finished a building and was confirming the load-bearing walls were exactly where he'd planned them. He said, you've been exceptional, Petra. Send the final invoice to the new address. He left at 2:17 p.m. The car service arrived at 4 o'clock. By the time Renata and Corbett were scheduled to celebrate the house transfer with a dinner that Corbett apparently had catered, Declan was 340 miles away unpacking boxes in an apartment nobody knew the address of. Now let me tell you what happened after. Because every divorce has an aftermath. And this one had one of the more instructive ones I've witnessed. The deed transfer recorded on March 9th. One day early. Renata found out through a property records alert she'd set up. She called Corbett. They celebrated. Her sister posted a photo on social media of Renata standing in front of the house with a sign that said our home with a heart drawn underneath. 47 people liked it. Corbett commented a string of emoji. The county notice arrived March 21st. 7 days after the baby was born. Not 6. 7. Renata called Godfrey Sims in a panic. Sims called me. He said, the county has filed an escalation on the property tax arrears. My client wasn't fully aware of the arrears situation. I said, the arrears were disclosed in full in the property schedule attached to the divorce settlement. Your client signed the settlement agreement acknowledging she'd reviewed and accepted the debt schedule. Sims said nothing for a moment. I said, Godfrey. Your client accepted a gift. Gifts come with the property's full financial picture. The picture was disclosed. She accepted it. I hope she enjoyed the 7 days. Sims said, she has a newborn. I said, she has a $912,700 debt encumbrance and a 30-day window to resolve $4,800 in property tax arrears or face accelerated foreclosure. That's what she signed for. The newborn is a separate matter. Renata called Declan. Disconnected number. She tried his office. He no longer worked there. His LinkedIn profile had been updated 3 weeks prior to reflect his new position at a firm 340 miles away. She found out his new city through the LinkedIn update. She didn't know the address, the firm's specific location, or his new number. Corbett called Declan's parents. Declan's mother answered. Corbett explained the situation. Declan's mother said, my son doesn't live here and I don't have a number for him. Then she hung up. Declan had prepared his parents 3 weeks earlier. They knew. They chose their son. Renata's parents tried to help. Her father contributed $4,800 to cover the immediate tax arrears. That bought 30 days. But the underlying problem, $912,700 in debt against a $1,020,000 property on a $70,000 combined gross income, didn't change. The HVAC lien. The landscaping lien. The combined monthly payment. None of it changed. They applied for refinancing 6 weeks after taking possession. 2 lenders. Both declined. Debt-to-income ratio too high. Combined income insufficient for the loan structure. The third lender offered a refinancing at 9.2% interest that would increase the monthly payment to $6,400. On $70,000 gross. They declined the offer. They couldn't afford to refinance and they couldn't afford to stay. They listed the house for sale 4 months after taking possession. The market had softened. They listed at $990,000. No offers for 3 weeks. They dropped to $965,000. One offer at $910,000. They needed more than $912,700 to pay off the debt and walk away clean. The $910,000 offer would leave them $2,700 short of their total encumbrances, plus they'd owe realtor commissions of approximately $54,600. They were going to walk away from the house Declan gifted them with $57,000 in debt. After 4 months. With a newborn. They went back to Renata's parents. Her parents covered the realtor commission. They accepted the $910,000 offer. After closing costs, realtor fees, and debt payoff, they netted negative $4,200. The house Corbett had been bragging about owning, the house Renata had posted a sign in front of that said our home, cost them $4,200 to leave. Plus 4 months of stress. Plus a county escalation notice that arrived 7 days after they brought a baby home. Now. Declan. I've kept loose tabs through his new firm's public work profile and one check-in call he made to my office 8 months after the divorce finalized. He's good. The new city suits him. The new firm is larger than his previous position. His income increased by $34,000 a year with a job change. His apartment, the one he prepaid 6 months on, became a permanent residence. He signed a 2-year lease. The $284,000 brokerage account is intact. The $38,200 personal checking is intact. The $322,200 he walked away with is invested and growing. He called my office once. 8 months post-divorce. His assistant called first to schedule. Which I appreciated. Efficient man. He said, "Petra, how did the house situation resolve?" I said, "They sold it 4 months after you left. Walked away with negative $4,200 after closing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And the baby?" I said, "Healthy. Born March 14th as expected. A girl." He said, "Good." I said, "Declan, are you okay?" He said, "I'm building something new. The foundation's solid. I'm okay." I said, "One more thing. Corbett's photography business." He said, "Tell me." I said, "He was booked for 3 corporate events in the spring. 2 canceled after word got around about the divorce circumstances. The 3rd paid out, but the client didn't rebook for the fall. He's down to weddings and some local commercial work. Income this year is projected at $22,000. Against a man who owes him nothing and earns $156,000 at his new firm." Declan said, "What about the $14,000 he owes me?" I said, "That's a separate civil matter. You never filed." He said, "I know. I don't need it." He didn't need it. That's the thing about architecture. When you build correctly, you don't need to chase loose ends. The structure holds without them. I've told this story once before. At a continuing education seminar for family law attorneys. A younger attorney asked me afterward, "Wasn't it your job to talk him out of gifting the house? To protect his equity? To maximize his settlement?" I said, "My job is to execute my client's lawful instructions as effectively as possible." Declan understood the property values better than any attorney would have. He made an informed choice to walk away from $135,000 in equity in exchange for an exit that couldn't be undone and a gift that would unfold at a pace he'd calculated to the day. The attorney said, "And you didn't feel uncomfortable with any of it?" I said, "The gift was legal. The asset transfers were documented and defensible. The timeline was precise but not illegal. Declan Marsh did not break a single law. He simply understood the architecture of consequences better than the people who were living in them." The attorney said, "What happened to him?" I said, "He built something new. That's what architects do." I've handled 340 divorces. I've seen rage. I've seen grief. I've seen vindictiveness that costs clients more than it costs their spouses. I've seen settlements that made no sense financially because someone needed to win more than they needed to walk away intact. Declan Marsh is the only client in 14 years who walked into my office and said, "I don't want revenge. I want architecture." And then built exactly that. The house sold. The debt was paid. The sign that said our home came down. Corbett's photography work dried up. The baby is healthy. Renata is somewhere in a smaller apartment with a man who still owes her ex-husband $14,000. And Declan is 340 miles away. In an apartment he prepaid. At a job that pays him $156,000. With $322,200 in personal assets he walked out the door with legally, cleanly, and completely. 340 divorces. 1 architect. I don't give advice outside of legal representation. But if I did, I'd say what Declan already knew. The best revenge isn't something you do to someone. It's something you build while they're still trying to figure out what you did. They're still trying to figure it out. He's already on to the next floor.